What did you want to be when you were little?
I wanted to be a writer, like a writer of books, novels. I wrote a lot when I was younger. I wrote screenplays and things like that, poems, and I still have some of that stuff sitting in my closet. Nowadays, I still kind of write, but I don't really write novels anymore. Maybe I'll return to it someday. But I
Mhm.
mostly just write like blog posts about music. I found that I like really like talking about music in a way that it's accessible to all people that may not be familiar with classical music. So, you come to my blog and you read a post and you're unfamiliar with Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. And then, but you read my blog post, and I'll tell you all about it. And I'll tell you what to listen for. And it's basically just making it easy to approach. I even approach that way in my program notes for people who may not be familiar with my style of music, who may not be familiar with me at all. You read my program notes, and hopefully my music's a little bit easier to approach.
Mhm.
So yeah, basically I wanted to write when I grew up. So I guess I still write. So
Were you an avid reader as well? Is that what inspired you to want to be a writer?
absolutely, when I was in elementary school, I was reading on a college level. And so I read tons and tons of books. So
Do you remember any books that really inspired your journey to become a writer, or is whether were you into the series that elementary school kids were into, Encyclopedia Brown, Beverly Cleary books, or Nancy Drew, or are you something way above, in a different realm, and like already reading college texts and novels?
well, yeah, I was reading like World Book encyclopedias casually when I was in elementary school, but I did read some of the typical uh, elementary schooler stuff like Captain Underpants and things like that. Which I don't think I did read those, but I was only there for the Flipperama. If
Hmm.
you know what that is. Oh yeah, we used to go to war over those books at the book fair. So, but yeah, I always used to get there first between you and me. But yeah, I used to read that too. And I think what basically drew me to classical music, in addition to doing a lot of listening, I read a lot of composer biographies. And I just went to the library. I used to check out like biographies of Beethoven and Mozart and things like that.
Hmm. Do you come from a musical family?
No, I'm the only musician.
Aha. So how did music enter your life? I know you said you were wanting to be a writer. So where along the line did music come in?
I've always been drawn to music ever since I was small because my mom played me a lot of music through headphones and things like that when I was a baby.
Hmm.
Um, but I just always been musically inclined, and I listened to the radio a lot when I got to Dallas. I listened to the classical music station, and I got my first experience making music when I was in elementary school when I took the required piano class.
Hmm.
And so that would have been about when I was 10 years old. And then I started composition around that time. I started trying to write my own music around that time. And then a couple of years after that, I started the cello, which I played for 4 years, no longer play. But they gave me some orchestral experience since I played in a local youth orchestra.
Wow. So do you still play piano at all, or do you consider yourself more of a string player?
Oh, let's see. I haven't touched the cello since I was like 15. So I still play piano. I can't like sit down and play you a Beethoven sonata, but I can. I'm mostly an improviser. So I
Hmm.
just sit down and I've cut albums of myself improvising. And I've also trained myself to read score at the piano since I'm getting more and more into conducting. I
Hmm.
like to sit down with a full orchestral score and read it at the piano. Like I'll sit down with Strauss's Don Juan and just try to transpose the instruments at sight.
Now, this is always an interesting question for composers. Do you compose at the piano or away from it?
Definitely away from it. I've come up with most of my ideas uh, in the weirdest of places. I'll be like at the Kroger getting the Go-Gurt, and then all of a sudden I'll have an idea for a piano concerto. But like I, I have a good memory when it comes to music, but when it comes to scheduling, no. But when it comes to music, I have a good memory, so I'm able to retain that idea, and then when I get home, I write it down. But usually I come up with most of my ideas outside of that. And I, I only go to the piano when I need to work out a chord or so. But
Hmm.
most of my work is done away from the piano. And I'm good at audiating, so I can hear everything as I write it down.
Very interesting. Everyone has such a different journey and process. So I love to hear about your personal journey. Do you have a favorite musical memory from when you were younger?
Absolutely. I think it would have been when I saw The Rite of Spring for the first time live. It was a very overwhelming experience. And I was about 14. And it was the 2010-2011 season, and the Dallas Symphony was playing it with Jaap van Spaden conducting.
Mm.
And I was studying that piece because I started composition lessons a year before that. And one of my very first assignments in composition lessons was to take a score of The Rite of Spring, take a recording, and then listen to the piece. I had never heard it at that point, and write down my observations. And of course, I think you remember when you heard the Rite for the first time. It was it was an interesting experience, to say the least. You had never heard anything like it before. And going through the score, got lost several times, especially in the Danse Crawl.
Hmm.
But it gradually grew on me. And when the Dallas Symphony did it that season, both of my mentors who were in the Dallas Symphony, well, one of them played in the opera orchestra, took me to rehearsals. So I got to see the piece be taken apart, put back together, rehearsed separately, the different sections and things like that. Then I went to the concert and heard all of it put together. And so basically hearing that score live definitely was a highlight of me for sure.
Hmm. Having or saving, I should say, their food intake or beverage intake to after a performance. Are you one of those that are nervous before hearing a premiere, or are you just very much into a zone and then celebratory status from the very beginning before the performance even happens?
Well, that depends on how the rehearsals have been going, whether I'm nervous for the premiere or not. In the case of ROCO, I was not nervous at all because we had great rehearsals, great rehearsals. Uh, what I was a bit nervous about Joyous Trilogy last year because I was conducting that.
Hmm.
And that was, I think, my third time in front of an orchestra, and I'm still getting used to rehearsals. So there was a lot of details I missed in that performance, and but I knew the score because I conducted it and I wrote it. But I was definitely nervous about how it would turn out, and turned out to be success, which is surprising. If it's out of my hands, like say if it's like a community orchestra that hadn't had me there for the rehearsals, and then just say, oh, just show up to the concert, then I'm a bit nervous because I hadn't heard it.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, it depends. Most of the time I'm excited, but sometimes I'm sitting near the back ready to run out if something goes wrong.
Well, you just mentioned conducting, and that is such a different journey than composing and being in front of an orchestra. People can tell you what it's going to feel like, but you really don't know until you're in front, and then you put your hands down, and there it is.
Mhm.
It's a completely different way of communicating. Can you tell us about your journey of conducting, what your first experience was, and the difference between conducting your own pieces versus another composer's piece?
Sure. I got really into conducting when I was younger. I used to go to a lot of Dallas Symphony rehearsals and watch the different guest conductors come in, and they had all different movements that affected the sound of the orchestra. Like, the orchestra would sound one way under Jaap van Zweden one week. The next week, Fabio Luisi would come in and make it sound completely different. And definitely, that got me fascinated. How are they making those sounds with their arms and hands? And that usually a little stick. Sometimes they didn't use the stick, but I started conducting in high school, and it was actually in front of my band, my school band, that I got some experience. And of course, back then I just knew the basic pattern, things like that. The basic groundwork. Really got more into it when I was in college, when I started studying it formally with somebody. More had like lab orchestras, lab bands. I was mostly into the standard repertoire because I grew up listening to it, and I had mentors that gave me all these scores, and I had seen these pieces be rehearsed and performed. I knew that I wanted to conduct those pieces, but the more I got into my conducting journey, it's mostly people wanted me to conduct my own music, which is very different from conducting other people's music because first of all, I compose the work, then I have to go back and I have to learn it from a different point of view. I have to go and learn it from a conductor's point of view. So I have to basically recompose my own work and look at it and put on a different hat, basically. It's actually informed my composition, I would have to say, because it's definitely made me write more playable music, that more enjoyable music that performers actually like to get under their fingers and perform. And that feels good. It looks good on the page, and it feels good when it comes off of the page, which is very important if you want like more people to pick it up and give it second performances. Like so, but basically, and then I'm actually just starting to get into the standard repertoire. I've done studies with Miguel Hart-Bedoya, who actually used to be music director of the Eugene Symphony there in Oregon. And I've studied with him for about 3 years. And basically Miguel, put the groundwork in me and basically instilled this sense of give the orchestra what they need. And so that basically graduated from Miguel to this summer, I'm doing studies with Marin Alsop at the National Orchestral Institute, which I'm nervous.
Also a direct connection to Eugene with Marin Alsop, who was director of the Eugene Symphony when I was in school in the University of Oregon.
Oh.
And I think I told you that I have a direct connection with Miguel because when he auditioned to take Marin's place, I was the piano soloist for the 3 finalists. So I played Rhapsody on the Theme of Paganini of Rachmaninoff for all 3 finalists, and Miguel was, from my point of view, the easy, clear choice to be Marin's replacement Eugene Symphony. So we have now a direct connection.
Oh, this industry is small. Like, gosh, I did not know that actually. That's really, really cool.
Yes. So it's the longer you live, the longer you realize how small and every connected it is. It's going to be pretty much 1 degree of separation for you very, very soon from pretty much everyone.
Basically like bacon numbers.
Exactly. Well, you talked about Marin and Miguel. Are there other musicians or non-musicians who have inspired you in particular?
Well, I can begin with my all-time favorite composer, which is Stravinsky.
Okay.
And Stravinsky is my favorite composer because everything he ever wrote was interesting. He went through all these different periods. And then, in the 1940s, he attempted jazz with the Ebony Concerto. But the one thing in common that all those pieces have is that he still manages to sound like himself. You hear any note of any one of those compositions and you instantly know that it's Stravinsky. That's inspiring to me because I also write in a number of different styles, and I definitely want to get to a point where people hear one note of my composition and go, yeah, definitely Quinn wrote that. And that's starting to happen. Like there's several parts of my Irish dance suite where people are like, that's definitely Masonian right there. And I'm like, what does that even mean? But I guess that means I'm doing something right. So, and he's definitely my primary inspiration when it comes to composition. And then when it comes to conducting, Miguel for sure is definitely a huge influence on me. I'm pretty sure Marin will be too when I study with her. Another conductor I've been studying with, Edwin Outwater. He's even conducted some of my pieces before. He's doing a work of mine with the Toledo Symphony on Friday and Saturday, in fact. He's actually very supportive of me and my work. I'm very influenced by his conducting as well. He's very clear.
If someone was to turn on Quinn Mason's playlist on your phone or whatever, what is on that's not classical?
It's a really good question. And I'm glad you asked that because I listen to a lot of non-classical music as well. One of my favorite genres to listen to is salsa music. So groups like Grupo Nietzsche from Colombia, Guayacan, which is also from Colombia, Lavos, Hector Lavoe is a huge favorite of mine. He's a salsero from like the 60s, 70s. He's legendary. There was a terrible movie made about him. Mark Anthony in the lead role. I wouldn't recommend it. In addition to that, there's a genre I like to listen to. It's West African kora music, Kora. And the kora is an African harp that I think is about 21 or 22 strings, usually tuned in F major, pentatonic. And it's very relaxing. It's kind of interesting because there's no sheet music. There's no kora sheet music out there. And the kora players are usually from generations of previous kora players. So people like Tumani Diabate, Balake Sissoko, their fathers and their fathers before them and their fathers before them all played kora and passed it down. So it's like a lineage of kora playing, and it's very atmospheric music. Usually they take these traditional African themes and they just kind of riff on them for about 5 or 6 minutes. And they do crazy stuff on the kora. It sounds like there are 2 people playing. In fact, there's an album by Tumani Diabate, which there's a disclaimer that says, okay, there is only 1 person playing this. There's not 2 people playing this.
Wow.
That's how crazy it is. So I would definitely recommend that. There's also new age music on my playlist. So people like Harold Budd, who passed away recently, unfortunately, put out a couple of new age albums in the 80s and the 90s. Well worth listening to. And then finally, I like a lot of EDM.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I got that because I had a friend in high school who introduced me to people like the chain smokers and things like that. So, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's a fascinating playlist. I'm glad I asked that question. That's awesome. You mentioned salsa. Do you dance as well, or is it mostly just?
Absolutely not. I cannot dance.
What's on your bucket list in terms of places to visit?
Well, I do need to see LA at least once. I mean, I've heard there's so much that goes on out there. Thank goodness that's going to happen next year. I'm going to the league conference, so I guess I can cross that off. I definitely want to go to see Europe. I don't know where in Europe, maybe like Germany or something like that, or maybe London, Paris, maybe New York. I need to see what all the hype is, basically.
Oh my gosh, you haven't been to New York yet, Quinn?
Nope.
Okay, for sure, for sure. It's going to be something on your bucket list. Where did you go to school?
I went to school here in Dallas. I went to SMU.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of weird. I went to Richland College, which is a community college. Then from there, I went to TCU for a year. And then I recently got done at SMU.
Is there a famous person you'd love to meet? Like, let's say if you could invite anyone over for dinner, one-on-one with Quinn Mason, and it could be anyone who's alive, who would it be?
Can I have 2 options?
Absolutely. Let's hear them. You're the person hosting, so let's invite a couple people.
So basically, I would have over maybe John Adams, the composer John Adams, who I've got to meet before. And we had a brief conversation, but I would like to have more of a conversation with him. Or Thomas Addis, whose music is very, very interesting. And I just want to figure out, why they write the music they write, what they think about composing and conducting. And both of their music is influential on me. And both of their career paths is something that I want to aspire towards someday. Definitely, I would have those 2 over. And then watch them get into it, because they have both contrasting styles. And I'll just sit back and sip the tea and watch.
Well, it's interesting. You chose both composer conductors. I mean, they both conduct their own music as well as other people's music. And have you seen Thomas's opera by chance, Powder Her Face?
I've not seen that.
That's pretty wild. So it's gonna be
even wilder than Wozzeck, you would have to say.
For sure. I mean, I've worked on Wozzeck before, and I love it's a masterpiece. If you have, I got to see that at the Metropolitan Opera live when I was in school there, and still etched into my memory that performance. It's amazing. But yes, I would say Powder Her Face is even more wild.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Very, very, very interesting. Okay. Well, I'm going to finish our interview here with a series of what I call rapid fire questions. And it's going to be a series of just 10 questions, which I give you an A or B. And I don't want you to think too hard about this, Quinn, and just answer first thing. For a couple of these, I know what you're going to choose just because of our conversation, but here we go. Are you ready? Buckle your seat up. All right. Early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Breakfast or lunch?
Lunch.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Planes or trains?
Trains.
Sun or moon?
Moon.
Beach or mountains?
Mountains.
Sweet or savory?
Savory.
Rolling Stones or Beatles?
Rolling Stones.
Wow, you're the first one so far in our interview process this year. Rolling Stones. Very interesting.